You know, being outlaws is in our DNA. That's what it is to be American. We're always the rebel opposition. We're always outnumbered. We're always hated. We're also feared and respected. I wouldn't have things any other way. I'm having a good time.
And we're live. Welcome back to the Greene Tavern, episode 38, featuring Melon the Hobbit and Porter. Before we start, I just wanted to say, Kevin, that was a fantastic intro.
Yeah, that was a bagger. I'm impressed. That was awesome.
All right. Well,
Thank you. Thank you very much. I was on mute. Thank you, gentlemen.
fantastic. All right. Well, Mr. Melon, we've all been waiting through this special, another spooky schizo episode, and I believe you had quite a bit to say tonight. You want to take it away?
Yeah, so just to follow up, in our last episode, Porter and I spoke of 2 strange encounters we had. Both of these events took place after seeing entities in a dream. Following our discussion, I encountered a friend who gave potential context to what we saw. To understand this, we must first realize reality doesn't work like we think it does. Humans are tripartite, spanning 3 different realms: the material realm, the realm of spirit, and critically for our topic, the subtle realm, the realm of dreams, the mind, and the ego, in between the material and the God of the heavens. Just as we immerse ourselves more fully in this realm each night, other creatures dream into the world we see. For them, the material is their dream. Some have good intentions, some do not. Some are in control of their actions when they visit us, and some are not. Subtle entities often see us the way that we see insects, low consciousness drones, or pieces of a whole structure. There are variations, but the scope of their perception and action is much larger than ours, so it's hard for them to care about individual humans. Not impossible. We can, as the ancients sought, distinguish ourselves in the eyes of the gods, or attract the wrong kind of attention. And I actually wondered what you thought about that, Porter, considering you had this happen to you.
I think it's interesting, and I'm not sure I would put it exactly like that, because in Scripture, all the demons are there to steal, kill, and destroy. And that doesn't mean that they're always paying attention to each individual person, but their ultimate goal is to see that end. So, but then again, we're not told in Scripture so much about the spiritual realm and how it acts, so we can only speculate. And that could be a very, I guess, a clear way to put it.
Yeah, I see this recurring thing about dreams, and I had thought of that thing that happened to you in the forest. You had a nightmare like right before that and saw the same thing appear in real life right afterwards, right?
No, that was my friend. He had the dream right before we had the first encounter in Hawaii.
Yeah, and your friend saw a drop in temperature and like physical changes, right?
I mean, as far as the physical changes of the drop in temperature, that was all of us. He was the only one that said that he had a dream, and that was said it has like a man with white face paint with black markings peering over him in the hammock, and then he jolted awake. Of course, he's not sure if he was already awake and just got surprised or not. And then that's when everyone heard the running through the camp.
Right, a white face paint and black markings. So what I wonder about this, we all innately connect certain animals to certain characteristics. Why? Is it purely societal conditioning, or is it something deeper? For a lion, it's valor. For a dragon, it's greed or solitude. For eagles, it's glory. For monkeys, it's cleverness. For pigs, it's gluttony. Does that remind you of anything? What do you think the visuals indicated with that?
Well, not entirely sure. I could speculate because I didn't really see. I mean, I didn't see it, and because I didn't dream it, so I don't really know exactly beyond what his description is. I mean, stranger in the forest. I mean, I can tales go back as far as time, as far as strange things in the forest being human-like and frightening.
Do you two gentlemen have any thoughts?
I'm not sure. Mr. Kevin? I think you might be stuck on mute again.
Yeah, I was I was stuck on mute. No, I've not had a chance to actually do any kind of recollection on that, sir.
So this is something you may be able to help me with, actually. I have a friend of mine who is big into Mothman, and I know very little about that sighting, but he did tell me some anecdotes. Falling back to the certain animals having certain characteristics in our psyche, I recall the Mothman was attracted to like a lover's lane spot where it kept being sighted, and I kept thinking of like a moth to a flame type thing. But do you know more about this? I've also heard theories of electromagnetism and stuff like this.
Yeah, I do. It's been a while since I've brushed up on my Mothman lore, but I'm a Mothman respector. Yeah, so typically the Mothman is associated with disastrous events. He's not only been spotted in Point Pleasant, but all throughout the world. Now, around the Mothman incident, there was the bridge from Ohio to West Virginia that collapsed, and I believe it killed somewhere between 60 to 70 people. Prior to that event is when people started seeing Mothman. Now, people saw him at, I believe, in an abandoned dynamite factory and some other places. But yeah, there were strange events like that, like what you were just describing as well.
Yeah, I do wonder if these things are biological or if they're what our mind can interpret. So if you're interfacing with a higher power, you're interfacing with something that isn't biological, and we have accounts of angels and demons showing up. The mind is trying to play catch up. There's like different eyes and limbs and so forth. And you guys may know better than I on this topic. Is it even possible for us do we even have that level of perception with things like this?
Well, I think it depends. That would certainly help to explain a lot of the ghost stories and phenomenon we see, especially in this state. You've got obviously stuff like the Brown Mountain lights, various lights at the different battlefields, like at Bentonville, etc. All these tales of pale riders. So I'm not sure what to make of that really, but it's one of those things where you've got so many stories that they can't all be made up.
Yeah, and I actually wonder, are there things out there that are friendly to us? So our instinctual reaction is to see these things as a threat. But is it the same way like an insect looks up and panics? Or do you think like these things are dangerous?
Even when the angels appeared to various people in the Bible, their initial reaction was terror, where they fell down on their faces. But and if there were an angel from God, they would tell them to fear not, and also would keep St. John from worshiping him whenever he was having his vision and revelation.
Can you expand on keep him from worshiping him?
Because all worship is to God alone, and of course, if an angel is of God, he's not going to allow us. They're not going to allow us to worship them, but only God himself.
Right, so they're like inhabiting like an in-between role or like a lieutenant, sort of?
Yeah, I mean they're God's messengers. I mean that's what angel means, messenger. And also the Saint Paul tells us to test the spirits, and if they don't confess Jesus Christ as Lord, then they're not of God; they're of the devil.
Right. So you think that's the one way to tell the intentions of something is to mention Christ's name?
Yeah, I mean, I forgot what podcast I was listening to recently where they were discussing having some psychedelic trip, and they thought they were encountering God, but as soon as they looked at the cross that was in their room, the vision went away because they had when they were looking at the cross, they were thinking about Jesus and what he had done on the cross, and he realized that the vision he was having and the entity he was encountering was certainly not of God.
It's funny you say that, man, because I've got a cross necklace my grandpa gave me, and I've done exactly what you're describing. I've sort of had it held over my mind's eye, and it does scare things away. And there is like this hesitancy of like covering, like, oh, this isn't serious, but this does happen, and so many people aren't. So many people are so disengaged from it, they don't know what they're playing with.
I agree. When you listen to or watch a lot of different shows on the paranormal, there are a lot of people that do understand, but on the flip side, there are a lot of people that just can't understand what exactly that they're playing with. Especially, I know when I was growing up, Ouija boards were a very tried and true, Halloween type of gig. You have parties and people will start playing with those. Even if nothing happened, you were increasing the chances of the realm of possibility of something happening.
Yeah, this was actually slightly before my time. What was the atmosphere like prior to 2005 with that sort of stuff? Because that's about as far back as I can remember.
It was often like people would, if you couldn't get a hold of a quote unquote real Ouija board, people would make their own. And it was always kind of, I don't know, like people thought it was edgy or kind of cool, kind of like how you have nowadays, like where people think the more edgy you can be about something, the cooler it is. We were also at a time where Christianity and the church was starting to lose its hold on a lot of things. So in the early 90s, people were scared to death of it. But by the late 90s, early 2000s, it was becoming more of a common thing that I would see at parties or on Halloween night. You go hang out with your friends. I know that regardless of where I stood at in church or my faith, it always freaked me out. So it was something that I wouldn't mess with. And I do have one Ouija board story. I had a friend that had a Ouija board and it freaked him out, and he gave it to me to dispose of. I had no idea what it was.
He gave you the Ouija. He's like, you deal with it.
He was like, you deal with it, you throw it away or get rid of it. I don't care. And I did, because like people just kind of like, oh, Kevin will do it. So I threw it away. Literally within 30 minutes, I got a flat tire.
Oh wow! So like instant.
And wow. I did have a couple years of bad luck after that. No, I don't know if that was just happenstance or whatever, but for me after that, definitely Ouija boards were something that I dare not be around. And to this day, I look at that, even if it, let's just say, even if it doesn't have real power, it's enough to make me think about it.
Okay, Horatius, I'm actually curious what your recollection of this is, because I think we're about the same age. Do you remember like a loss of faith around the time that Kev's describing? And like the not taking this stuff seriously?
I'm trying to think. I don't personally, but I know of others who did. Um, I don't know. It's. I guess I'm young enough that I didn't really pay much attention at that time. I suppose I know you're kind of going off of Kevin's Ouija board story. When I was in, I guess, middle school, high school, that was sort of the edgy thing. Um, but they just sort of faded out of existence. I don't think even the young Zoomers and Alphas know what they are, which is probably a good thing. But yeah.
Yeah. Porter, I heard you had some cryptid stories for us. Was that true?
Yeah. Do we want to get into that now?
Let's do it.
All right. I got two beasts that are local to my area. One of in Bladen County and Brunswick County. We got the beast of Bladenboro, which apparently is, as most described it, a black panther, which is unusual for the area. But what's weird about it, I guess the why it would be considered a cryptid, is that the way it ends up killing animals. And this was back in the 1950s, and it really hasn't been seen since. But apparently, it had ended up killing several dogs over the course of several days. And what was weird about the deaths of the dogs was that the heads would be crushed with a lot of blood, almost where they hit the dogs had been exsanguinated, where they had a autopsy done on one of the dogs, and it was only had like a few drops of blood left in the body. And then there was another farmer had reported that I think some goats and a pet rabbit had been the pet rabbit had been found decapitated, and a goat had also died with its head flattened. But as far as that, the most of the descriptions of it was like about 5 foot long, sleek, sometimes bushy, and always like a black, and had a weird sound that it would make similar to like a crying baby.
So like a predator cat that sounds like a crying baby and crushes skulls. It sounds horrible, man.
Yeah, and drains the its victims of its blood.
Now, I don't know about the other aspects, but the sounding like a crying baby is interesting because I don't know if you've ever heard a cougar scream before, but that's how they sound. I've had a encounter or two with a cougar up in the mountains, as well as just listening to them on various videos because I was trying to figure out like what is that god awful noise. And bobcats make the same or a similar sound. That is true. But maybe there's something to go off of with that.
I remember feeling like I was being watched, because I probably was, in the haulers there. We've got bears up here, but that's it, man. It did feel, it almost felt like a predator like you're describing, like almost like a feline presence or something.
Well, what's interesting, you guys mentioned that that is technically the official explanation. So this happened back in the 50s, right, Porter?
Yeah, back in the 50s. I think the first report of it was in 53, and then there was I think the last report of it that I could find was in 54.
Yeah, so supposedly the thought behind it was a bobcat in the area, and but there's a controversy around that. There, like the story's like rather interesting. I've read up on it, and it's been years and years ago, so I'm a little rusty on it. But I think there was a controversy in town because a lot of the townsfolk were quite freaked out by the incident because, like you were mentioning before, the murders of the dogs were pretty gruesome, and I think that there was like a giant manhunt as well, to search for this beast. But my understanding is sometime in 54, a local farmer caught the bobcat, and the mayor of the town displayed the bobcat to say, "Oh, look, we've got this." But and supposedly the reports of any kind of animals being murdered or whatever stopped. But I've read other things that the sheriff of the town and the mayor were trying to keep things quiet because not everybody quite believed that the beast had been caught. But it's been some time since I've read up on this one.
Yeah, I was reading one of the accounts where the two of the dogs that had gotten killed, one had been found where it was blood all over his porch, big puddles of it, and a pool of saliva that had killed the dog at 10:30 in the evening, and it had left it lying there, and he had wrapped it up in a blanket. And then the beast came back later that night about 1:30 in the morning and had killed the other dog and took it with him. And they found it days later where the dog's head had been torn off, the body was crushed, and the jaw had also been torn off.
Yeah, I remember that there was a lot of people just thinking that there was a vampire roaming around the area. But yeah, just doing a quick search on it, it looks like they did do a manhunt, and man, this is pretty wild. They had between 500 and 800 people turn out to do a one-night hunt.
That's an army, man.
I know.
What?
Yeah, apparently the officials put the hunt to an end because there were just too many people out in the woods hunting an animal, probably with firearms. So they were like, we don't want people just shooting randomly in the woods when you got about 800 people out there.
Let's see if I can. I do have a picture. Here we go. This is the supposed bobcat that did that to the dog. Yeah, so, okay, on the night of January 5th. So, I mean, you think about it, in January in North Carolina, it's pretty cold. I mean, I'm talking about if this is at nighttime, it's probably in the 30s, maybe 20s. You have 500 people, and then you have a second night where 800 people could turn out. That's insane.
Wait, they were in a swamp?
800 to 1,000 people joined on the 7th. So 3 nights. Wow. I knew that this was a pretty big ordeal, but it's been some time since I've read up on this. And I remember the whole thing about the it's kind of a bad picture. It's just not that well put together, but very digitized. But yeah, definitely reading back up on this just very briefly, I forgot how big of an ordeal this really was. So
good.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
There's something I wonder about that my friend brought up. Are there such thing as like hunter beings where when there's a large amount of suffering in an area, like I've heard this, I've seen schizo posts where they call this like loosh or things like this. Are either of you guys familiar with this? Like beings that show up when a bunch of suffering is feed on it.
I've heard of the theory. Yeah.
Can you expound on that for the listeners?
Just that's their food. So if we're talking in terms of if we're in the material reality and these things are in like the dream reality, then their food their food is human suffering. I mean, you think of Monsters Inc., right? With where they would send the monsters in to make the kids scream and like bottle it. It's kind of the same concept. And you could see how that could like cascade out of control really fast. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
That would be sort of in line with the way that a lot of these sightings kind of play out, where they're almost always tied to some sort of mass suffering or whatever, kind of going into the Mothman thing with the bridge collapse, or I believe some of the stories around the Brown Mountain lights have to do with train derailments, or at the very least, there's similar stories to that. And I wonder if maybe these cryptids or whatever are something kind of like what you just described, where it's some sort of a demonic presence that is coming to feed off of these events, or maybe cause. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's also this thing where anytime something bad happens, like a bunch of people show up to help the place, but then as like it drags on, people really start turning on each other, and we think that like this is from people getting tired and so forth and being driven to madness. But what if we have reality backwards on that? What if things arrive to it's like a parasite like picking at a wound more and more? You know what I mean?
No, I do. And I'm trying to think of, because I've heard different stories of that happening, where events happen, but people, I know that, kind of going back to Mothman. Mothman is one of those where that's been discussed, where people don't know if he is actually bringing on these events. So like he just happens to come, and those events, like he's kind of like a harbinger of death, or if he's just attracted to these things to kind of like be a signal of a disaster happening. So Mothman is one of those that kind of falls in that category. And I'm trying to think of other events that I've heard of, or other, cryptids or stories that I've heard of, but I've heard this before. It's definitely an interesting rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah, and there seems to be this delineation between like these more ephemeral things, which I guess we mostly call demons, and like the more physical things, like which I guess we mostly call cryptids. Demons being an umbrella term, a generalization. Fundamentally, a demon is one who is envious of God. And like humans, they can be different proportions of material to subtle composition. So I wonder, like, you know, the skinwalkers, vampires, and werewolves. Do you think these are fully physical things, like biologics?
Sometimes, like with vampires, the legend is usually a demon possessing a corpse, a freshly dead corpse that had only been in the ground for maybe a couple days, and terrorizing people, or a sorcerer in the blood magic, which is also attributed to vampirism. And with werewolves, historically, it was viewed as either a demon appearing as an apparition, or someone using a glamour spell, as what the medievals call it, which is they're given demonic strength. The change is in appearance only, but not physical. So that they appear as a werewolf, they have superhuman strength because the demon is giving them that strength. But as far as an actual physical change going from man to werewolf is only an illusion.
I've never heard that, but that makes sense, actually. So you're getting superhuman strength, but you're still a humanoid, but you look like an animal.
Yeah. I mean, that's how the medievals viewed it. I mean, the Malleus Maleficarum talks on it. I think King James's Demonology speaks on it too, which is pretty much, he was borrowing a lot from the Malleus Maleficarum.
I think it really depends, and it's really hard to draw the line, because I do believe fully that many cryptids are simply just that, undiscovered animals. And, some of the evidence for that would be found in, some of the, I guess you could call them softer cryptids. For instance, I forget the name of it, but there is a legend for a long time of these, large black cats in England, and eventually they just found out that they got cougars there. So that kind of exited the cryptid category at that point. And I wonder if something like the Beast of Bladenborough, or maybe even some of these, like, I don't know, Sasquatch, we'll just take that example. I wonder if these are purely physical beings, and at the same time, kind of getting onto what Porter was kind of alluding to. What if, there's that other category of some sort of, demonic or spiritual mix that maybe even attempts to take the form of these various things. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's interesting when the further back you read, like from the ancients to the medievals, they speak of these things as matter of factly, like it's, and in our modern era, we kind of tend to discount a lot of this stuff just by offhand, but got to consider we got thousands of years of people, like, just, this was the way things were, and in the past maybe 200 years, we've kind of shifted away from the spiritual side of things as an explanation. And but then again, we go into like the spooky stories that we like to listen to on podcasts, like the Bigfoot and stuff. It's it kind of makes you wonder if it's just, maybe the ancients and the medievals are right, and we shouldn't just brush aside so easily things that we can't just scientifically explain.
It definitely feels like we've become super dense and material, you know? Like you've got all these things, and I keep harping on this like subtle realm, subtle entity thing, but I mean, things like fairies probably are real, but we've just like lost our ability to perceive them, in my view. Like there probably are beneficial, although they were tricksters, right? There probably are even beneficial versions of these. But what do you think, Porter? You've got good history on that.
I don't know in my what my personal view on them is. I haven't really made a decision on it, but as far as what I've studied on it, either it falls into, if they're tricksters, they're likely just demonic and just using that as a facade because it comes from a different culture that is being Christianized. So they have their former myths, and then are just still using that facade. Or it could be just the elemental spirits that are designed to do the things that God has designed them to do, as far as how they govern nature. Like you have the powers and principalities. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're evil in the context that Paul gives, but it might be the angels, for lack of a better term, or other spirits that God has put in place to govern over certain aspects of his created realm.
There's also something to be said about the potential for these entities coming into existence and sort of fading out throughout the ages. There's a couple different angles to tackle this with. One of them is the concept that as a land becomes more civilized, all of the jagged edges, if you would, the map is filled out, right? And we see this with the comparison of Europe and the Americas. Europe in the medieval period and even before that was full of all sorts of stories. But for the most part, they're kind of cryptid or, fairy tale mythology has sort of gone to the wayside as that continent has been filled out. Whereas in America, it's all alive and well because, for better or worse, a lot of this country is still pretty wild. At least much more so than Europe is. And then I believe Tolkien actually touches on this quite a bit. Maybe not intentionally so, at least the angle that I'm taking it. But if you look at how he describes the transitions of the ages, from the first age to the second age to the third, these various races are entering and exiting the world sort of as the ages change. So what I mean to say by that is maybe something similar can be said for the various cryptids or entities throughout history. What would you say to that?
I think we lose our ability to perceive these things, but they're still there, which gets kind of dangerous for us. Going back to Tolkien, and of course we're talking about Tolkien, the different eras where like there were different rules. That really resonates with me, man. I'm not saying you could shoot fireballs at one time, but I feel like conditions change,
Yeah. Well, certainly, God doesn't call prophets down to cast fire down from the heavens anymore. And, other various differences from now to the ancient world.
Yeah, Porter, there was one more thing. You mentioned sorcerer blood magic, and what did you mean by this?
There are different schools of magic where blood magic was usually considered taboo even among pagans. Like in the ancient Greco-Roman cultures, there were laws against such things because it involved murder, where people would kidnap somebody, exsanguinate them, and use their blood as for their rituals, which often included consuming blood.
So if you murdered someone, you would have to collect the blood?
No. Like if they were murdered somebody for the reason to get blood for rituals, like somebody that's doing blood magic, then yeah, they would have to collect the blood, which was often assumed was also mixed up in the lore of vampires, which is, I mean, that's not something that, you know, everyone had like a tale of vampires back then, but it was something that's kind of just added into the myth of vampires as we know it today, is where it some of its origins comes from. Not just the undead, which was in that time was considered a demon possessing a body and terrorizing people.
Right, because the spirit's totally left, and you're inviting something into it. But if it's undead, that's like a third party doing that, right? Like a necromancer?
Yeah, I guess that would be the closest thing to it. Necromancy is more historically more to do with talking to the dead or summoning spirits to talk to. More not like, you know, well, I guess there was a little bit of the like the zombie stuff that you have in hoodoo and voodoo, but most of necromancy was trying to gain knowledge from dead spirits, which is they're just talking to the demons in reality.
Well, yeah, wait a minute. Aren't they going to lie to you? Aren't they gonna... there's nothing that can go wrong here.
I mean, they don't always lie. Well, they do always lie in a sense, but you can still get knowledge from them. But there's always going to be some lie mixed in somewhere that's going to be dangerous. Because there's, you know, it's not a fair deal. I've never dabbled in this kind of stuff. I just read on it. I kind of know more than I wish I knew.
You know, the article that the Old Glory Club put out on Monday sort of touches on this, the little horror story that was written, and I thought that was really interesting. The whole idea of you don't get what you bargain for, or you do in a sense, but there's always a catch, and it's in their best interest that you don't know that, or you're not privy to the entirety of the deal.
Yes, many such cases. That's actually something I was warned about. Is I have kind of been delving into this stuff, and that's like shining a flashlight at these things, man. You better make sure you're talking to a priest of some sort and have some sort of protection. And that's something to keep in mind. If you become like demonic obsession is as dangerous as suppression or possession. As a dear friend pulled me aside and told me. So be aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, the sources that I read were from Christian sources, and like one in particular, like Montague Summers, he was a Roman Catholic priest in the I think most of his books were written in the 1920s. It's interesting, his translation of the Malleus Maleficarum, he has a forward in the book where he compares witchcraft of the medieval time with Bolshevism and that was going on in Russia at the time. And it was just this, he described it as just a spirit of rebellion, because that's what witchcraft is. It's just rebelling against God's law and his order. And but as far as like what was very fascinating about the Malleus Maleficarum, this was two German guys that had wrote this book, and it was their prescription for the average Christian against the demonic was to cross themselves. And at the time, crossing yourself just meant that remember that you're a baptized child of God, and that you're God's, not the devil's. So, and they would even add in anecdotes where, like, this one girl had gone to a witch's house to meet some men, and then she decided to repent on her way up the stairs, crossed herself, and then the witch forced her out of the house and told her to leave. So she got out of there. So that's a way of God protecting his children, even if they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. But she repented and she crossed herself, remembered that she was a child of God, and it protected her from the witch.
Yeah, don't ever think that, like, you're too far gone, by the way. If anybody out there is thinking that, you can always go back, man.
All right. We're coming up to the bottom of the hour. We do have one super chat, and I'll go ahead and read that. So it's from, it's on Entropy from Capitalismo for $5. So thank you, sir. Thank you, Patriot. And he says, strong recommend Lake Monster Traditions by Michael, I believe it's Merger, like burger, for a scholarly approach to cryptids and folklore that takes both as serious fields of inquiry. I have not read that book, but one book that I do have that I recommend, it's called Monsters in Print. You can find it on Amazon. It's by Adam Benedict. It's a pretty interesting book. And what this guy did was he went through different newspapers. He actually went to different libraries and stuff. I guess he went online too. And he released this back in 2019. So he obviously had a lot more access to stuff, but it's a collection of like different articles from newspapers from the 18s and 1900s. And it's just got a ton of newspaper clippings or stories from articles or different magazines of different like cryptids, wild men, sea monsters, and stuff like that. It's pretty interesting, and I definitely on his note will suggest Monsters in Print. Definitely a strong recommend on my end if you're interested in this particular area. And it's also neat to I guess, like, in some ways, like, this is just kind of like a little bit of American lore as well. On that note, before we do wrap up, any final thoughts from the panel?
I think we're entering a very spiritually active time, and we're going to be seeing more very interesting things. And don't think that the material is all that there is. Secularism's on its way out. Nobody's going to think this way in like 10 years.
Concur. Porter, do you have any final thoughts, sir?
Go to the gym, get strong, because the monsters are coming back, and we're going to have to fight them.
Mr. Rhodes, do you have anything to add?
Certainly, I would just add on to what Mr. Porter said by saying also to go to church regularly. It's a spiritual battle as much as it is a physical one.
All right. Concur on all parts. I do have one bit of news on my end. If you check the description, I'm releasing some music just to kind of get some of my stuff out there. It's Kevin or K Hedgecock.bandcamp.com. So I'm just going to shill that really quick. Yeah, so go there, check that out, donate if you like the stuff, spread it out to your friends. It's just some soundtrack stuff. You heard one of the tracks tonight. All right. Mr. Rhodes, do you want to take us out?
Absolutely. Thank you all for attending, for tuning in tonight to the Greene Tavern. It's a pleasure putting on the Halloween special. We're hoping to do more special episodes like this around major holidays throughout the year. So be on the lookout for the Thanksgiving special and the Christmas special coming up here soon. And other than that, gentlemen, it was a pleasure. Mr. Melon, Mr. Porter, appreciate having you on.
Yeah, cheers.
All right. Kevin, take it away.
All right. See y'all next week. Have a good one.